So if you have not heard, DC city councilors have decided to make a change to their crime law. Now, although DC is a district, although this is local, you have to remember that DC does not have statehood. And because DC does not have statehood, people like Joe Biden can kind of jump in and go against legislation that they have, even if they have unanimous support, which from what I read they did. He can jump in, go against that legislation, even if it means he's siding with the GOP. And that's exactly what happened. Democrats are very upset about it. I kid you not. Let's get into it. Here we go.
US Congress may wade into Washington DC's laws for the first time in decades after the city's council revised its criminal code to soften penalties. House Republicans trying to roll back the law have gained an unlikely ally as rising crime generates widespread concern.
Republicans found an unlikely ally on Capitol Hill Thursday, President Biden. He says he will sign a GOP-led bill to roll back a D.C. crime bill passed by the city council if it makes it to his desk.
One thing that the president believes in is making sure that the streets in America and communities across the country are safe.
So you see what's happening here, right? You have Joe Biden siding along with the GOP in reference to this crime bill for DC. Even though they had unanimous support, he decided to side with the GOP. So when we go back to that State of the Union address, and we tried to tell you guys then this is all optics, the fact that he brought victims, family members to the State of the Union address that had been killed by the police. I told you guys back then, this is all for show. Pay attention to how politicians vote. Pay attention to how they legislate. Pay attention to their actions, not their words. So he brought victims' family members to the State of the Union address and talked about the problem with policing to get on their side. And then here we are. It's a month later? And he's already siding along with the police state, with the GOP when it comes to legislation. This is Joe Biden overstepping and intervening in local politics. Let's go on.
Includes DC.
He's out of touch.
The D.C. Revised Criminal Code Act softens maximum penalties for violent offenses like carjackings, burglary, and robbery. It eliminates most mandatory sentences and requires more jury trials.
I am totally against our Congress blocking anything that our elected officials are doing.
The city.
Let's see what it does again. I want to pause here because she moved kind of fast. I just want to show it here so you can look at it. The D.C. Revised Criminal Code Act softens maximum penalties for violent offenses, eliminates most mandatory sentences, and requires more jury trials. Let me ask you a question. Isn't everyone in this country supposed to have a right to trial by jury? But you know what ends up happening? Most of the time, those cases don't go to trial. Most people don't have a trial. So, it's worded a certain way. You have a right to a trial by jury, but most people don't even get to have one. So one of the things they're asking for here in this measure is to require more jury trials. What is wrong with that? The other issue eliminates most mandatory sentences. Let's go back to the crime bill, the 1990 crime bills that Joe Biden co-wrote. There were mandatory minimums for drugs. That's why you had people in jail for marijuana for like 20 years because of Joe Biden's crime bills. What's wrong with that? The next one softens maximum penalties for violent offenses. Define violent. Define violent. Because technically, carjacking is defined as violent offense, whether you actually physically hurt someone or not. Keeping people in jail longer in this prison industrial complex that we have in this country has shown not to necessarily curb crime. Because oftentimes when they are released, what happens? They get back into their usual behavior and they end up right back in prison. Because the prison system that we have in this country actually does not rehabilitate the prisoners, even though they call it rehabilitation. That doesn't happen. And if you look at prison systems and you compare it to other countries where they actually do rehabilitate the prisoners, you can see the difference. Look at the prison system in Norway and compare it to the prison system that we have in this country. This is what Joe Biden wanted to go against. He don't even want all of you guys to go to jury trial. Let's go on.
Or jury trials.
I am totally against our Congress blocking anything that our elected officials are doing.
The city's mayor opposed the revision, but she was overruled by the more progressive council. Washington, D.C.'s delegate to the House says she was surprised to learn the president wouldn't veto the measure.
That was the first mistake there, her being surprised by Joe Biden's response. We have to remember who Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is kind of known for being tough on crime. So I'm not sure why she's surprised with his response.
Kind of counting on him.
The bill already passed the House.
Democrat voters, people who align that way, they want safe streets and safe communities too.
Next, it will need to pass the Senate, likely next week.
They want safe streets and safe communities too. But we've already seen, based on the data, having more police does not curb crime. Police aren't trying to save and rescue people that live in poor Black inner city neighborhoods. They're just not. And I can tell you from personal experience, my family's from Baltimore. The police were not trying to show up there to rescue you. By the time the cops showed up, the person who called about a victim, the victim was already dead. They'll show up quickly if you live in a wealthy neighborhood, though. So having more police doesn't actually decrease crime. One way to decrease crime is to fix the poverty issue. The majority of crime is poverty driven, and that's what people have to really understand. So they say that they're trying to decrease the crime issue in this country, but what they're really trying to do is just continue to increase the police state. That's what this is really about. Before you know it, we won't be able to walk outside our doors without seeing a cop on our block.
Expected to gain support from all Republicans and some Democrats.
If anything, we should be increasing penalties for certain offenses, and that's just my view of it.
If Congress does roll back the law, it will be the first time it has done so in more than 30 years.
So that has happened. And it's just, I told you, this is what I've said before. These politicians, they can work with people on the other side, and they call it bipartisanship. But you can't participate in a protest with someone on the other side. You're not allowed to do that. But they can do it. Now, I think this is very key. And for people who seem to not understand who Joe Biden was, give me just a second. I have another clip that I want to show you as well. There was a panel discussion about this, and that includes Simone Sanders. So they had her on the panel, of all people, about this particular issue with Joe Biden doing this about face. You got to hear this to believe it. Listen to this. Now, this was on Meet the Press. So here we go.
It's done. And so we are seeing, at least on policing and crime, I think the president ended up setting out where he thinks his party should be on this issue. But what I'm most interested in is, like, where's the follow-up? Is it just this one-off thing? Is it maybe another event where you have cops behind you? Or does this become something we're going to see regularly to really inoculate not only himself, but the rest of the party from all the defund the police attacks?
Samal, let me start with the Democratic side. How do you think the president handled this issue? And I know you certainly know the ins and outs of D.C. politics as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think he's balanced this and what you made of Muriel Bowser's remarks.
It's interesting that they're asking her, because you guys know that she was a part of Biden's campaign, right? Remember, she was a part of Bernie Sanders' campaign and then Biden's campaign.
You know the ins and outs of D.C. politics as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think he's balanced this and what you made of Muriel Bowser's remarks.
So look, on President Biden's side, I think that he himself, it was no shock to me that this is where he landed because of who he is. You have to go all the way back to like 1994 and before when the bill that everyone was called the crime bill, again, police unions helped then Senator Biden, along with then President Clinton, author that bill that did a number of things that Joe Biden would say that his vision of policing in America had never fully been realized. And he was never for defund the police. He's like, I want to fund the police, which doesn't, really square well with some folks with.
Now, what's really interesting here is that Simone Sanders was asked this question about Joe Biden's history with the crime bills when Biden was running for president in 2020. And Simone Sanders actually made excuses for Joe Biden when it came to the crime bill. She was asked, honestly, I would say pretty hardcore questions directly about it. And she was making excuses for it. And here we are today. She was trying to get that press secretary spot for the White House if he won, but that didn't happen. Let's go on.
In the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I think the staff at the White House should have definitely called the stakeholders. It doesn't make sense to me why there was no communication. You knew where Joe Biden was going to be. This ain't a surprise. From Mayor Bowser's perspective, I think it is, I'm so glad you had her on, Chuck. I think it's very interesting where she's at. She didn't come out and say, this is a thumb in the nose for statehood.
No, she's not.
No, that's not where she is.
Biden.
No, not at all. But she's just like, look, we could have addressed this. We should have been allowed to address it locally. We don't ever want Congress to interfere, but this is where the conversation needs to go. And I think she is like most mayors, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Matt, the reason I compared the two.
Well, actually, Mayor Bowser is not like most mayors because most mayors lead a city that's a part of a state. DC is not a part of a state. DC does not have statehood. So she's not like most mayors. There are certain decisions that she actually cannot make because of the position that DC is actually in. Whereas other mayors can make some of these decisions. That's the difference. Some other mayors can just say, yeah, this is what we're going to do in reference to policing, and that's it. That's a wrap. And they don't have to worry about the president intervening. DC does not have that privilege. It's another reason why I couldn't live in DC. But they don't have it. So I wish someone would have pushed back on that. Like, no, she's not like most mayors. Let's go on.
Because as Mark pointed out, Biden could sort of paper over the divide in his party right now by doing what he did, or at least he's trying to. We'll see what Chicago teaches us. There isn't a person that can do that on the abortion issue on our side.
I think a couple things. I think the problem, though, Biden might inoculate himself, but there is a host of House Democrats. A lot of them are in marginal seats, which are now left out to dry. And I'm glad Patty Murray's getting her political cover, but it's a hand-wrapped gift to the NRCC. I think one thing that you think,
by the way, let me pause there. Yeah. You think all those Democrats who are the ones really angry at the president right now because they think, oh, if I knew you were going to, I might have voted differently. You think this will be a star in some of these ads?
It should be, and it will be. And I think, look, I've been on the other side of that. I've been when I was at the NRCC when President Trump would do something, and we just walked the plank for you. You know what I mean? I get that. It's not a fun position to be in, and it's hard now because the arguments are tougher to make. You're not making home rule arguments in Utica, New York. But but when it comes to abortion, look, I think one thing at least that the Republicans have gotten somewhat used to is, and we've talked about this a lot last year, whatever you think of it, they are willing and more comfortable to go and say, at least as a rebuttal to Democrats, be, look, you are for abortion on demand, abortion for this, that, the other. It's harder to do that and go on offense on this sort of bill for the Democrats when it comes to crime.
Yeah, I do think on the abortion piece, though, before we were having such a theoretical conversation, right? Like Democrats would say, oh, they want to jail women. And Republicans are like, that is hyperbole. But now you've got in South Carolina, the woman who's being charged for taking an abortion pill, and she's being charged with a crime. Like she's going to court. She's on trial.
I don't even think they should even frame abortion as left-right anymore because there are Democrats who are also anti-choice. and some of them sit in Congress. I think they should stick to the issue at hand, which is the fact that here was Joe Biden deciding to agree with the GOP and intervene with a policy that had unanimous decision from the DC city councilors, as if all of a sudden that fear that they speak of about the right wing doesn't matter anymore. And it's because they have collected interests. And what do I mean by that? There are certain things that they do agree on together. They have no problem being pro-war. They have no problem supporting the military-industrial complex, both parties. They may disagree with certain wars here and there, but they have no problem voting for that bloated $800 billion defense budget. Both parties did that. They have no problem being pro-police. Even some of the ones who said they were for defunding the police. Both parties support giving the police more money. Both parties support corporate donors. Both parties have no problem with that. So these are the things that it's important that we really point these things out. That when it comes to policing, especially for those of you who are abolitionists, and those of you who are against the prison industrial complex, when it comes to an issue like that particular issue, both parties support the police state. Period. Doesn't matter if they're a Republican, Democrat, you can't even say the progressives, because the progressives, even the ones that said they were for defund the police when Trump was in office, they oppose it now or they're silent about it now. It's all optics. JB says if they're shocked at Biden or disappointed at Biden, then they weren't paying attention. Or were they, and they're using Biden as a scapegoat to allow decisions like this to happen? Yeah, and so that maybe they can make room for someone else. The majority of Democrat voters don't want Joe Biden to run again. That's just going by the polls. Majority of them don't want to run again. Maybe this is their thing here. Thank you so much for the super sticker. James sends a laugh emoji there. The Oracle says the DC revised criminal code brings the DC code into context with criminal codes of most of the 50 states. Thank you so much for that. And JB says, nope, they push people to accept plea deals even if they're innocent. That's right. Most people do not actually get a jury trial. They don't teach you that in civics, though. They don't teach you that. I took civics when I was in school. It was required. And they'll tell you everyone has a right to a trial by jury, but they don't tell you that most people don't get it. There's that piece. Now, for people who don't remember who Joe Biden was, I played this at the opening. I'm going to play it again because I just want to remind you who he was.
Crime is not Democrat or Republican. Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock.
He warned you back then. They call it making the streets safe. I'm going to rephrase it and say, giving the police more money. And he tells you that it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. So there you go. Again, this speech took place in 1993. Let's go on.
Category and moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement. The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
That's who Joe Biden was, and that's who Joe Biden is. This clip never gets old. Never gets old.